The call came at 6:47 in the morning. I know the exact time because I'd been awake since 5, sitting at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee that had gone cold, watching the light change outside the window the way I'd done every morning for the past 3 years since I retired. There's a particular quiet in a house at that hour. A kind of peace you don't appreciate until something shatters it. My phone buzzed against the table. It was my son-in-law, Dennis, my daughter's husband, and the first thing he said wasn't hello. "Arthur, I'm at St. Luke's. It's Penny, my daughter, Penelope. 41 years old, 3 kids, a house in Columbus. I'd helped her and Dennis pick out 11 years ago because the backyard had a big oak tree and she'd always wanted her kids to climb one." "What happened?" I said, and I was already standing, already moving toward the bedroom where my jacket was. "She collapsed at work. They think it's her heart, Arthur. I can't reach my mother, and the kids are home with the neighbor, and I didn't know who else to call. I told him I was on my way. I told him not to worry about the kids. I'd handle it. I told him Penny was strong and she was going to be fine, even though I had no idea if that was true." You say those things. You say them because the alternative is silence, and silence in those moments is unbearable. It was a 3-hour drive from my place in Dayton to Columbus. I drove the whole way with the radio off. My wife, Sandra, was not in the car with me. That needs to be said plainly because everything that came after doesn't make sense without it. Sandra was in Scottsdale, Arizona, had been for 11 days at that point. She'd told me she was going to visit her college friend, Vivienne, who'd been going through a rough divorce and needed company. That's what she said. I'd driven her to the airport myself, kissed her at the curb, watched her pull her rolling suitcase through the automatic doors. I texted her from a rest stop outside Springfield. "Penny is in the hospital. Heart scare, driving to Columbus now." 3 dots appeared, then they disappeared, then nothing. I stared at the phone for a moment longer than I should have, given that I was alone at a rest stop at 7:30 in the morning, and my daughter was in a hospital bed. Then I put the phone in my pocket and got back in the car. Penny was stable by the time I arrived. A cardiac event, the doctor said. Not a full heart attack, but a serious warning. They were running tests, adjusting medications, talking about a procedure in the coming weeks. She was awake, pale, and furious about being in a hospital gown. "Dad," she said when I walked in, and she reached for my hand. I sat with her for 2 hours. We talked about nothing important, the oak tree in her backyard, whether her oldest was going to make the travel baseball team, what she wanted to eat when she got out. Dennis took the kids from the neighbor and brought them by in the early afternoon, and for a little while the room was full of noise and sneakers squeaking on linoleum and a nurse asking everyone to please keep it down. It was the best 2 hours I'd had in a long time, which tells you something about the state of things before. Sandra finally called at 3. I stepped into the hallway to answer. "How is she?" she said. "Stable. Scared. She looks tired." I leaned against the wall. "When are you coming back?" There was a pause. Not a pause like she was thinking. A pause like she'd rehearsed for this moment and was deciding whether to use the rehearsed version or try something else. "Arthur," she said, "I need to tell you something. I've been married 43 years. In that time, I've learned the particular sound of a conversation that's going to change everything. It has a specific weight to it. The air gets heavier before the first word lands." "I'm not in Scottsdale," she said. I didn't say anything. "I'm in Sedona. I've been in Sedona. I've been in Sedona. And I'm not alone." I was 64 years old, standing in a hospital hallway that smelled like antiseptic and old coffee, with my daughter 20 feet away recovering from a cardiac event, and my wife of 43 years was telling me she was in Sedona with another man. His name was Craig. She'd met him at the church book club we'd both attended for years, until I stopped going because my knees made the folding chairs unbearable. She'd kept going. Apparently so had Craig. "How long?" I said. 8 months. 8 months. I counted backward in my head involuntarily. 8 months ago, I'd taken her to our anniversary dinner at the Italian place on 5th Street. I'd ordered the same thing I always order. She'd had the sea bass. We'd shared the tiramisu. 8 months ago, I want a divorce, she said. I've already spoken to a lawyer. She'd already spoken to a lawyer. Our joint account, I said. My voice was very even. I surprised myself. Have you touched it? Another pause. I transferred some money to cover expenses. How much? She told me. I had to put one hand flat against the wall to keep myself grounded. It was merely $60,000. Our savings. The account I'd been putting money into for 30 years, through layoffs and home repairs and my mother's medical bills and Penny's college tuition, $60,000, transferred to an account I didn't have access to pay for a life she was building in Sedona with a man from our church book club. I'll have my lawyer contact you, she said. Okay, I said, and I hung up. I stood in that hallway for a long time. A nurse walked past with a cart. An orderly said, "Excuse me," and I moved aside. Somewhere down the corridor, a television was playing the local news. Then I went back into Penny's room. She looked at me. She knows my face, the way only children know their parents' faces. She could read me at 3, and she can read me now. "Dad, what happened?" "Nothing that needs to concern you today," I said. "How are you feeling? The doctor came in while I was out." She watched me for a moment. "Let me have it. He says I can probably go home day after tomorrow." "Good," I said. "That's good." I sat back down. I held her hand. I stayed until visiting hours ended. I slept in Dennis's guest room that night. Couldn't sleep, mostly. Lay on top of the covers looking at the ceiling, doing math in my head. The kind of math that's not really about numbers. In the morning, before anyone else was up, I called my own lawyer. His name is Phil, and he's been my attorney since I bought my first house. He picked up on the second ring, bless him, even though it was before 8. I told him everything. The transfer, the amount, the fact that she'd already retained counsel. He listened without interrupting, which is one of the things I've always liked about Phil. "Okay," he said. "First thing today, I'm filing for a temporary restraining order on the remaining joint assets. Do not move any money yourself. Do not close any accounts. Don't call her again without me present. She already took most of it, Phil. I know, but we can work with that. Marital waste. Dissipation of assets. Depending on the timeline, there are real arguments here." He paused. "Arthur, I'm sorry. I've known you and Sandra for a long time. I know. How are you doing?" I looked out the kitchen window at the backyard. The oak tree was just starting to come into bud. Penny's youngest had left a plastic shovel in the grass. "I'm managing," I said. "My daughter's in the hospital. I'm focused on that." "Okay," Phil said. "Focus on that. I'll handle this." I stayed in Columbus for 4 more days. I drove the kids to school in the morning and picked them up in the afternoon. I made dinners from whatever was in Dennis's refrigerator, mostly pasta things, and one very questionable soup that the kids ate anyway without complaint. I sat with Penny every day and let her complain about the hospital food and the uncomfortable bed, and the fact that her cardiologist had the bedside manner of a parking meter. Sandra texted me once, "I hope Penelope is okay." I showed it to Phil. He told me not to respond. I didn't. What I keep coming back to, in the months since, is the timing. I don't think it's a coincidence that she called me when she did, when Penny was in the hospital, and I was in Columbus, and I was 3 hours from home, and everything was chaos. I think she'd planned to call before I got back. I think she wanted to deliver the news and have distance between us when she did. What I don't think she planned on was me being the kind of person who would just keep going. I drove back to Dayton after Penny was discharged. I walked into the house we'd lived in for 26 years. Her clothes were gone from the closet. About a third of the furniture was missing, pieces she'd apparently arranged to have picked up while I was in Columbus. The bedroom looked like a room in a house where someone had moved out in a hurry. I stood in the doorway for a minute, then I went to the kitchen and made coffee and called my younger brother Vincent. He drove over within the hour. We sat at the kitchen table and I told him everything, and he didn't say a lot, which was exactly right. He did say at one point, "Arthur, she made every one of these choices. Not one of them was an accident." He was right. That helped. Phil was as good as his word. Within 2 weeks we had a hearing on the asset dissipation. Sandra's attorney was aggressive. They argued that the transferred funds were her contribution to marital expenses while she was establishing separate residence. Phil argued that the transfer predated any formal separation filing by nearly 3 months, and that the use of those funds was not for marital expenses but for the support of a relationship she'd been conducting without my knowledge. The judge froze the remaining assets. She ordered a full accounting of where the $60,000 had gone. The accounting was illuminating. The Sedona rental was paid up through the end of the summer. There were restaurant charges and spa visits and hiking gear. There were 2 plane tickets from Sky Harbor to Denver in February that I could not account for and chose, ultimately, not to think about too hard. But there was also this: Craig, it turned out, had his own significant financial complications. A small business that had not been small businessing well. Some credit card debt. Sandra had been helping with that too, out of our money, in amounts that Phil's financial forensics turned up buried inside larger transfers. That changed the numbers considerably. My daughter, when I finally told her the full story, was quiet for a long time. We were sitting on her back porch. The oak tree was fully leafed out by then, mid-June. Her youngest was running through the sprinkler in the grass. "Did you have any idea?" she said. "No," I said. "Not specifically. There were, I don't know, moments. But I told myself I was imagining things." "Dad," she said. And the way she said it was not accusatory. It was just sad. The way you sound when something turns out to be true that you wished wasn't. "I know," I said. "We watched her son run back and forth through the sprinkler. He fell down once and got up and kept running." "She should have been in that hospital with you," Penny said. "Yes," I said. "She should have been. She wasn't. I know that too." Penny reached over and put her hand on top of mine. 64 years old, and my daughter was comforting me in her backyard while her son shrieked with laughter in the sprinkler water. Some things are humbling. You let them be. The divorce was finalized 8 months after that morning in the hospital hallway. Phil negotiated well. The $60,000 was largely accounted for in the settlement division. What could be traced was treated as an advance against her share of the marital estate. What couldn't be traced, we argued, as waste. We didn't get everything back, but we got enough that I can look at my bank statement without feeling the floor shift under me. The house is mine. We paid it off 6 years ago, one of the things I was proudest of in my working life, making that last payment. It's mine now outright, in my name, and in the mornings I still sit at the kitchen table with my coffee and watch the light come in. There's a particular quiet in a house at that hour. It's different now than it used to be. Not worse exactly. Different. Sandra and Craig are still in Sedona, as far as I know. I don't follow it. I have enough to occupy my time. Penny's recovery went well. The procedure was a success, and she's on a new medication regimen, and she has more energy now than she did before, which she says is strange, but she'll take it. I've been driving to Columbus most weekends. The oak tree got a tire swing this spring. The kids use it every afternoon. Vincent checks in on me more than he probably needs to, but I don't tell him that. It's good to be checked on. My neighbor Helen, whose husband passed 2 years before all this happened, brought me a casserole in the first week I was back alone in the house. We've had dinner twice since. Nothing more than that, and I'm not in any rush, and she isn't either. But it's something, a version of something. The book club Sandra and I attended, the church one, where she met Craig, I went back in January. I don't know exactly why. Stubbornness, maybe, or just the feeling that I was not going to let this thing take everything from me. The book that month was a novel about a man rebuilding his life after a long marriage ends. I did not pick it. That's just how it went. We sat in a circle in the fellowship hall and talked about the book and drank terrible coffee, and nobody mentioned Sandra or Craig or what had happened, because that's the kind of small courtesy people extend when they don't know what else to do, and I've learned to accept it. On the drive home, I thought about all the mornings I'd sat in that kitchen, all the cold coffee, all the quiet, and I thought, I'm still here, I'm still sitting at that table. That counts for something. It counts for quite a lot, actually, when you get to a certain age and understand that surviving with your dignity intact is not a small thing. It is, in fact, the main thing. My name is Arthur Whitfield. I am 64 years old. I spent 43 years married to a woman who left me for a man from our church book club, took $60,000 out of our savings to do it, and called me to deliver the news while I was standing in a hospital corridor because our daughter was in a bed 20 feet away with a heart that had stuttered. I did not fall apart. I finished my coffee. I called my lawyer. I drove the kids to school. I sat with my daughter. I came home, and every morning I sit at that table, and the light comes in, and the house is quiet, and it is mine. That's enough. Some days it's more than enough. It's exactly enough. I've had a lot of time to think about what actually happened. Not the events, I know those by heart, but the mechanics of it, why it went the way it went, and why the ending landed where it did. Sandra made a series of choices. Each one followed from the last. She chose to pursue something in secret. She chose to let it go on for 8 months. She chose to transfer $60,000 before she said a single word to me. She chose to call me while Penelope was in a hospital bed, probably because she calculated that I'd be too distracted, too frightened, too off balance to respond with any clarity. And she chose to have a lawyer already waiting. Every one of those was a decision, not an accident, not a moment of weakness. A decision, and decisions have weight. They accumulate. What I've come to understand after 64 years of living is that the life you end up with is almost entirely constructed from the decisions you made when you thought nobody was keeping score. Somebody always is. Maybe not another person, but the world has a long memory, and so do the people who love you. Phil found the money, not all of it. Some of it is gone in ways that can't be fully recovered. But enough, because she'd been sloppy, or maybe arrogant, or maybe she just didn't think I'd looked that closely. That's the thing about underestimating someone. It tends to be expensive. What I keep returning to is this. I didn't fall apart because I'd spent 40 years building something that wasn't her. It was mine. My work, my habits, my relationships, my reputation with people like Phil and Vincent and my neighbors and the folks at that church book club. Those things held when everything else went sideways. You can't take a man's foundation if you didn't build it. Penelope asked me once, not long after she got out of the hospital, whether I was angry. I thought about it honestly before I answered. I was, I said. For a while I was very angry, and now I mostly feel clear, I said, like a window that got cleaned. That's the truest thing I know how to say about it. Betrayal is terrible, but surviving it with your judgment intact, with your dignity intact, with your relationships intact, that's not nothing. That's actually the whole game. The people who hurt you are counting on you to crumble. They've already written that version of the story in their heads. When you don't crumble, when you call your lawyer and drive the kids to school and sit with your daughter and come home and make the coffee, you've written a different ending than the one they planned for you. I'm not extraordinary. I'm a retired man in Dayton who likes his mornings quiet and his coffee black. But I showed up when it mattered. For Penelope, for Dennis, for those kids with their backpack straps and their sneakers. I didn't disappear into my own grief when someone else needed me. That's the only philosophy I have. Show up, don't steal, don't lie to the people who trust you. And when something is taken from you, whether it's money or time or 43 years of what you thought was a shared life, don't let them take your steadiness too. That's the last thing. Hold on to that. The house is quiet in the mornings now. It's mine, and the light comes in the same way it always did, and I am still here. That's enough.